Hello, our group has opted the crisis of how COVID-19 impacted the supermarkets industry, and I'm going to present a brief introduction for this topic. Many industries and sectors were affected due to this virus. One of the major industries which was severely affected due to the COVID-19 global pandemic was the supermarket industry. The situation was exceedingly difficult as there was an immense amount of shortage in the workforce, causing delayed deliveries and thus creating a lack of products at the supermarkets, provoking customer outrage. Big players of these industries, such as Coles, Woolworths, and Kmart, had to apologize to the agitated customers for their mismanagement and inability to prevent this crisis. Next slide, please. This caused a great deal of unsatisfaction and frustration to the customers in those trying times, which inflicted panic and fear in people's mind, leading to frequent violent outbursts, arguments, and practices like panic buying and overstocking by the customers. Also, it was a significant factor for the major changes in customer trends and behaviors. For example, according to the data from Australian Bureau of Statistics, expenditure on food and alcohol consumption was increased marginally due to the frustration and stress during those times. Moreover, some customers were not complying with the COVID-19 restrictions, leading to heated arguments and debates in the stores, which only helped to worsen the situation. Although this crisis also resulted in some technological innovations which were implemented in the supermarkets, such as online stock management systems and cleaning robots to reduce dependency on human personnel. Also, there were many customers and even employees who were against these changes. Next slide, please. The leading cause of this crisis was the global pandemic, but some other factors were also involved, one of them being mismanagement and lack of backup plans and strategies by the supermarkets as the COVID-19 virus was an unpredictable event. So, supermarkets failed miserably in handling this situation. Also, most of the people did not act responsibly and continued to spread misinformation, creating panic among the masses. The masses were already terrified of the deadly virus and the shortages of basic amenities, which provoked outrage and panic among the people. As a result of all these various little factors, supermarkets had to bear loss of customer base and their reputed goodwill. Now, passing on to Lewis, who will discuss the issues in further detail. Thank you.
A relative issue in the supermarket industry that was brought on by COVID was a change in consumer behavior. The trepidation caused by COVID had lasting effects that are still felt to this day. An academic study published by Emerald Publishing Limited on consumer behavior and supermarket activity found fundamentally the three issues that supermarkets face relating to the changing consumer behavior were panic purchasing, stockpiling behavior under uncertainty, and the products that consumers purchase. Evidently, during the pandemic, supermarkets were barraged with consumers who were driven to panic buying mode by the sudden mass spread of information relating to food shortages. Plus, supermarkets were faced with an unprecedented shortage in the first few weeks since they were unable to keep up with demand. With the lack of trust and confidence felt by consumers, and with the decreasing supply chain, consumers were more inclined to spend more and hoard more items, which led to stockpiling. Panic purchasing by consumers caused a heightened awareness among consumers, which exaggerated the effects of the supply disruptions. With these shortages, consumers went out of their way to unnecessarily purchase food and equipment despite no signs of shortages. Retail therapy, as it was termed, was a way that consumers coped with the uncontrollable situation to try to regain control and also to control their emotional state, which led to stockpiling. With the disruptions in supplies, consumers went out of their way to purchase products that they would have never purchased before. Staying at home for longer periods switched consumers' spending habits from healthy eating like fruits and vegetables to unhealthy eating like beer and snacks. A study conducted by the University of Sydney found that 49% of all retail workers reported that their job security had decreased as a result of the pandemic. This massive rise in insecure workforce affects the supermarket industry as it gives an employee little economic security and little control over their working lives. An insecure workforce can lead to three main factors that affect supermarkets. These are intention to leave employment, job dissatisfaction, and organizational commitment. Workers have felt that with the lack of security shown through COVID, they are at a risk of either losing their job or having their hours reduced to a minimum. With this factor, employees are more likely to leave, especially part-time and casual workers, which are the bulk of supermarket employees, with 74% of casual workers feeling somewhat insecure about their job and 70% of part-time workers feeling the same. Job insecurity has led to a decrease in job dissatisfaction, and with a dissatisfied workforce, customer relationships and interactions start to break down. With reportedly 80% of men feeling that quality interactions with customers has decreased, and 82% of females reporting a decrease in satisfactory customer interactions. This leads to customers not wanting to come back to the store and employees not putting their best into their job. Organizational commitment has also been hampered by an insecure workforce, with more people wanting to have a structured and steady work life. Supermarkets haven't been able to fill this role, leading to less effort being put in by employees, causing a drop in overall customer and employee dissatisfaction. Next, I'll be passing it over to George, who will discuss more issues.
So I'll be discussing international supply chain restrictions. So the COVID-19 pandemic negatively impacted the international food supply. We saw a massive shift in the access to certain foods and availability during this period. There was an international impact shift in this period, and one of the key areas affected were supply chains. Due to the fact of customers panic buying goods while stores were understaffed, supermarkets were unable to compete with the high demand of purchasing, resulting in a supply chain breakdown. The unavailability of workers due to illness or isolation created a crisis where the shelves were empty and the employees were unable to restock in this time due to the lack in staff. This resulted in Walmart, Costco in 2020 closing stores at 8 p.m. earlier than the common 10 p.m. close time. This allowed Walmart and Costco staff throughout the night to restock before the surge in customers started flowing in the following day. Purchase and product limits were introduced to combat the high demand in sales, which limited 2 packets of meats per person, 1 packet limit on rapid antigen tests, and the supermarkets monitoring product availability during this time, pushing customers to only purchase products they deem necessary. Now moving on to trends. The economic impact of the pandemic can be seen across many sectors, but was widely visible within the consumer goods sector. Social media feeds were flooded with images of empty shelves of household supplies such as toilet paper, which caused a wide range of panic buying amongst the community. Consumers shifted the way they shop during this time and what items they purchase in large-scale quantities. During 2020, McKinsey tracked the varied impact of the pandemic across most grocery categories, which we saw a significant increase in. The percentage of sales in household supplies were up by 76%, packaged food sales were up by 46%, and child products by 45%. Consumer good companies would have to understand the factors causing these issues. During this planning period, was conducted to forecast 3 types of demand archetypes, which consisted of pantry, load and consume, preserve, and now at home. These load and consume archetype looks at how customers are likely to stock up on products due to the fear of shortages. This includes household supplies, where the consumer is likely to use and consume during this period, whereas preserve behavioral archetype looks at stockpiling goods, where they can preserve over a long period of time, but their consumption does not increase during this period. And lastly, now at home, which is once the work from home period commenced, in which it focuses on purchasing in certain areas such as ready to go meals, which can be consumed immediately. Now passing it over to James.
I'll be talking about planning methods and techniques that could have been used during COVID. Firstly, a disaster prevention plan is usually a written document that outlines different actions to prevent and avoid risks that could create disaster during a crisis for a company. Some scenarios that this would be made for could be employees, stock, and customers. As for employees, a plan would be made to combat employees being dissatisfied with the business and how they are getting treated. An example of this would be when Woolworths had rewarded 100,000 of its staff with free company shares for their efforts during a period of upheaval amid bushfires and the coronavirus buying frenzy in 2020. This allows many employees to be happy during a time of crisis where employees are getting less work and may potentially leave the company. This can also boost employees' morale while working in a very difficult circumstance where all employees are needed mostly to supermarkets. My second technique is the Delphi technique. It's a decision-making method in a 3-step model. The first step is a group of experts are gathered into a panel where they will respond and answer any questions. Then the second step is to create a questionnaire for the experts. And then lastly, the last step consists of analyzing the responses from the experts. Then the panel will come to an agreement of what the best approach should be. Unless there is no agreement, then the 3-step model cycle would continue until there's an agreement made. This technique could have been used to determine a way for big supermarkets to work around COVID, such as creating the idea of using online shopping, which is contactless and helps avoid spreading COVID. Thirdly, brainstorming is a widely used technique that involves group members collaborating and developing potential solutions to the situation. Brainstorming follows 4 rules, which includes more ideas the better for developing a better solution. Every idea given is acceptable and valid. Building on other people's ideas is acceptable and encouraged, so that more ideas are expanded on and developed on. And finally, criticizing other members' ideas should not happen during a brainstorming session because it'll make that person who is criticized not participate as much. This technique could have been used to put together ideas to minimize the damages to supermarkets around Australia during COVID, such as generating ideas to make sure that stakeholders are happy and how they're working around the crisis. Lastly, the simplest technique is a nominal group technique, where group members silently and independently write down as many problems and solutions as they can think of that relate to the scenario they're in or are given. This helps the group plan for their next step, which involves discussing the advantages and disadvantages of each and every idea. And then finally, they would choose an idea that would suit the situation, allowing for all ideas and solutions to be considered for use fairly. This technique has been used widely during COVID to plan for implementation of many COVID-style ways of life in running supermarkets across Australia, such as contactless purchasing and setting limits on customers' buying. Now I'll pass it on to Max.
For supermarkets across the country, the COVID-19 pandemic has highlighted the vulnerability of the international food supply chain. This is where our plan begins. The strain forced on supermarkets to stock their shelves, as spoken about previously, caused both stress and panic for everyone trying to buy their necessities in a time with more questions and answers. We plan to increase supermarkets' percentage of produce and products bought domestically every year. Should we ever face another pandemic, natural disaster, or anything else that impacts the international supply chain, supermarkets won't be left completely stranded with empty shelves and angry customers. Applying Doran's SMART principle, our plan is specific to reducing the reliance on the international food supply chain, meaning in the event of a future crisis, supermarkets will have more produce on their shelves and be less impacted by this issue. Increasing domestically brought produce every year can also be easily measured as it's numerical, and progress can be graphed and analysed very clearly. This plan is both attainable and reasonable, as every supermarket will have a different percentage target, roughly ranging from 3 to 10% every year, which is dependent on the size of the company. For example, Woolies and Coles will have a larger yearly increase compared to the IGA, as they have larger budgets to spend on produce and also import more products internationally than any other supermarket in Australia. It is further timely as this plan is tracked yearly and doesn't allow for supermarkets to delay buying domestic produce. It forces supermarkets to have a gradual increase in their domestic purchasing, as opposed to the supermarkets themselves trying to panic buy from local farmers during a crisis. Next slide, please. We have highlighted a potential problem with this plan. Our plan does rely on local farmers and big corporations working together, which due to inflation rates on fruit and veg, increasing from 5.1% to 6.7% in the last 12 months, could cause issues moving forward. However, in a study done by Mintel, they found that in 2019, 44% of Australians wanted to buy locally produced food. This number grew to 48% in 2020 and 52% in 2021. A potential solution to this would be increase the cost value of produce bought, then generate a smaller turnover profit when selling at wholesale value. This would mean more produce is getting to the shelves of supermarkets. However, supermarkets themselves would be making a smaller profit as a result. This profit would still be larger than the previous plan that left supermarkets stranded without produce. Next slide, please. A ripple effect of this plan is that it can aid for different issues in consumer behaviour. Highlighted previously, the panic purchasing behaviour of customers has the potential to exaggerate the effects of the supply chain disruptions. Panic purchasing can be associated with the stress and unsureness. Should more produce be on the shelves, theoretically stress and unsureness over product supply will decrease, resulting in less panic buying. This in turn will boost consumer morale and keep customers happy during times of uncertainty. With less panic buying and more produce in store, supermarkets won't be forced to place restrictions on purchases. In turn, this will lead to more happy customers as people will get what they need and supermarkets don't have to dedicate precious time and resources into enforcing restrictions, when that time and resource can be devoted elsewhere to solving different issues. In conclusion, our plan aims to address multiple issues we found in our research surrounding supermarkets and COVID-19. We also believe that this is a stable and effective base level plan for supermarkets to implement if there is another panic or global crisis. Thank you.